Today, the Royal Commission Interim Report. Hello again, I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to our latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. The Royal Commission into Misconduct in the Financial Services Sector was released today. It's the interim report, and of course the final one will be out next year. It's several hundred pages in length, but the messages can be boiled back to one word: greed. And by the way, if you value the content we produce, please do consider joining our Patreon program, where you can support our ability to continue to make great content. Here's the link, and it's in the comment below. The Royal Commission has released its interim report. And in the executive summary, it points to greed as the underlying factor. And it makes the point that it's adherence to the law and regulatory supervision of the law that are the main issues. Essentially, selling products and services at all costs appear to be the driver. This is what they say. The Commission's work so far has shown conduct by financial services entities that has brought public attention and condemnation. Some conduct was already known to regulators and the public generally, and some was not. But why did it happen? What can be done to avoid it happening again? These are now the key questions in this interim report, with particular reference to banks, loan intermediaries and financial advice, with a view to provoking informed debate about both questions. Why did it happen? Too often, the answer seems to be greed, the pursuit of short-term profit at the expense of basic standards of honesty. How else is charging continuing advice fees to the dead to be explained? But it is necessary then to go behind the particular events and ask how and why they came about. Banks and all financial services entities recognise that they sold services and products. Selling became their focus of attention. Too often it became the sole focus of attention. Products and services multiplied. Banks searched for their share of the customer wallet. From the executive suite to the front line, staff were measured and rewarded by reference to profit and sales. And when misconduct was revealed, it either went unpursued or the consequences did not meet the seriousness of what had been done. The conduct regulator, ASIC, rarely went to court to seek public denunciation of and punishment for misconduct. The prudential regulator, APRA, never went to court. Much more often than not, when misconduct was revealed, little happened beyond apology from the entity, a drawn-out remediation program, and protracted negotiations with ASIC of a media release, an infringement notice, or an enforceable undertaking that acknowledged no more than that ASIC had reasonable concerns about the entity's conduct. Infringement notices imposed penalties that were immaterial for the larger banks. Enforceable undertakings might require a community benefit payment, but the amount was far less than the penalty that ASIC could properly have asked a court to impose. So what can be done to prevent the conduct happening again? As the Commissioner's work has gone on, entities and regulators have increasingly sought to anticipate what will come out or respond to what has been revealed with a range of announcements. These include announcements about new programs for refunds to and remediation for consumers affected by the entity's conduct, about the abandonment of products or practices, about the sale of whole divisions of the business, about new and more intense regulatory focus on particular activities, and even about the institution of enforcement proceedings of a kind seldom previously brought. There have been changes in industry structure and industry remuneration. The law already requires entities to do all things necessary to ensure that the services that they are licensed to provide are provided efficiently, honestly, and fairly. Much more often than not, the conduct now condemned was contrary to the law. Passing some new law to say again, do not do that, would add an extra layer of legal complexity to an already complex regulatory regime. What would that gain? Should the existing law be administered or enforced differently? Is different enforcement what is needed to have entities apply basic standards of fairness and honesty? By obeying the law, not misleading or deceiving, acting fairly, providing services that are fit for purpose, delivering services with reasonable care and skill, and, when acting for another, acting in the best interest of that other. The basic ideas are very simple. Should the law be simplified to reflect these ideas better? The Royal Commission distilled and organised in 3 categories: issues, causes, and responses. The issues can be divided into 4 groups. First, there are issues about access to banking services. Second, there is a group of issues around the roles and responsibilities of intermediaries, those who stand between the purchaser of a financial service and the provider of that service. Third, there is a group of issues around responsible lending. And fourth, there is a group of issues about regulation and the regulators. The issues intersect and overlap in different ways. Putting the issues in groups should not be allowed to diminish the importance of identifying and responding to those intersections and overlaps. So thinking about access, do all Australians have adequate and appropriate access to banking services? Thinking about intermediaries, for whom do the different kinds of intermediaries act? Thinking about mortgage brokers, mortgage aggregators, introducers, financial advisors, authorised representatives of licensees, point of sale sellers of loans. For whom should each kind of intermediary act? And if intermediaries act for the consumer of a financial service, what duty do they now owe that consumer? What duty should they owe? Who is responsible for each kind of intermediary's defaults? Who should be responsible? How should intermediaries be remunerated? Are external dispute resolution mechanisms satisfactory? Should there be a mechanism for compensation of last resort? On responsible lending, consumers, should the test be applied by the lender remain not unsuitable? How should the lender assess suitability? Should there be some different rules for some home loans? Should the NCCP Act apply to any business lending? In particular, should any of its provisions apply to SMEs or agricultural business or guarantors of some business loans? To what business lending should the Banking Code of Practice apply? Is the definition of small business satisfactory? Should lenders adopt different practices or procedures with respect to agricultural lending? Are there classes of persons from whom lenders should not take guarantees or should not take guarantees unless the person is given particular information or meets certain conditions? And how should lenders manage exits from a loan at the end of the loan's term or if the borrower is in default? In terms of regulation and regulators, have entities responded sufficiently to the conduct identified and criticised in this report? Has ASIC's response to misconduct been appropriate? If not, why not? How can reoccurrence of inappropriate responses be prevented? Has APRA's response to misconduct been appropriate? If not, why not? How can reoccurrence of inappropriate responses be prevented? Now turning to causes, what were the causes of the conduct identified and criticised in this report? Conflict of interest and duty, remuneration structures, culture and governance, regulatory responses? And in terms of responses, what responses should be made to the conduct identified and criticised in this report? Are changes in law necessary? Should the financial services law be simplified? Should carve-outs and exemptions be reduced or eliminated? In particular, should grandfathered commissions or the point of sale exceptions to the NCCP Act or funeral insurance exceptions be reduced or eliminated? How should entities manage conduct and compliance risks? How should APRA and ASIC respond to conduct and compliance risk? Should the regulatory architecture change? Are some tasks better detached from ASIC? And are some tasks better detached from APRA? What authority should take up any detached tasks? And should either or both ASIC and APRA be subject to external review? What is the proper place for industry codes of conduct? Should industry codes of practice, like the 2019 Banking Code of Practice, be given legislative recognition and application? Should an intermediary be permitted to recommend to a consumer, provide personal financial advice to a consumer, sell to a consumer any financial product manufactured by an entity or a related party of the entity, of which the intermediary is an employer or authorised representative? And finally, is structural change in the industry necessary? Now, there's a long list of things there, but let me give you my perspective. The Royal Commission so far has definitely touched on the critical issues that need to be considered. But now we have to take the thinking further. And I think there are three things to ask. The first question relates to structure. To my mind, we should be thinking about how to break up the financial services sector into smaller, more manageable entities. We should separate insurance from wealth management, from lending. And we should separate advice from selling and manufacturing products. Secondly, there is a clear opportunity to implement Glass-Steagall as part of this, to separate the activities that relate to risk-taking and profit-making from those relating to the meat and potato banking services that we need in Australia. And thirdly, there's a big job to be done with regard to cultural change inside the financial services companies. It requires different thinking from the top. It requires customer-centric thinking. It requires a whole new ball game. And I guess the question there is, are those inside the industry up for it and capable of delivering it? But I think we also have to ask the same question of the regulators, because to my mind, the regulators have failed us significantly. APRA and ASIC have not done what they should have done. They've been captured, they've been too tame, and frankly, they've been taken for a ride by the industry, who believes that paying small amounts away when they're caught out is just the cost of doing business. So the challenge now is to take this forward and really start to lay the foundations of a financial system that will do Australia proud. So the challenge now is to take this and begin to design a financial system that will take Australia forward over the next decade. And to my mind, that's going to have a very different structure to it, a very different set of cultural norms, and a very different set of customer outcomes. And to take it full circle, all of this needs to be built from the point of view of the customer. Now, that will be a radical change, but to my mind, that is what we need to do. In a later post, I'll explore what customer centricity really means in more detail. And it's also worth reflecting that the sorts of things that we've seen in the finance sector here in this report could actually also be discovered in many other corporate sectors across the land. Because at the end of the day, this is the way that companies in Australia seem to want to behave. Now, if you get value from the content we produce, please do consider joining our Patreon program, where you can support our ability to continue to make great content. As always, if you like what you've seen here today, please share and like the post and add a comment or question. I read them all. And if you want to join the growing band of subscribers who receive alerts when we release new posts, do subscribe now by hitting that subscribe bell. And if you're already subscribed, many thanks. I really appreciate your support and participation. I'm Martin North, the Principal Analyst of Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you again next time.